Hello friends, welcome to UPSC CSE in English. Hello friends, welcome to UPSC CSE in English with Siddhi Bangard. This is your mentor and educator. So let's begin our today's session. We'll be discussing about India IR series today. It's the first class of India IR series. All right. Briefly about me, I'm Siddhi Bangard with 3 years of cumulative teaching experience and a CSE graduate. I have appeared in 4 mains and an interview, qualified for CATSAT, MBA and other exams, and HR graduate from XLRI Jamshedpur. All right. Now, uh, briefly about our platform. So we provide you with daily live classes where you can ask doubts just like normal classrooms, live test and quizzes, and also notes post each session. They are provided in the PDF format. Structured courses which are aligned completely with your syllabus. In fact, I'll show you how this present session is also aligned to your syllabus. Unlimited access, so with one subscription of UPSC CSE. So under the entire UPSC CSE category, which has greater than 200 courses, you get access to all those courses with one subscription of Unacademy. And you get access to all the recorded, live, and upcoming lectures and courses. With that, our fee structure is presently for a 1-year subscription. The cost is 44,000, which comes down to under 40,000 if you use my code SBUS and you get an instant 10% off. And for a 24-month course or a 2-year subscription, our cost comes down to 58,000 if you use my code SBUS and get it 10% off. On all these courses for the 6 months, 12 months and 24-month subscription, we have a no cost EMI also. So if you feel that this is a too big a cost to pay at one point of time, you can always take the EMI option. With that, let's proceed for today's class. So I will just set out the expectations of the India IR series. It is the launching session. And what are we trying to do here? So this is the Asia edition. And the idea for this whole series is that you actually cannot comprehensively do all the IR if you just combine it into 1 or 3 or 4 sessions. So as a part of the India IR series, which I'll be running weekly, mostly at this time only in the mornings, or if the time is changed, I will let you know on the Telegram channel if there's a changes in the timings. So here as a part of that, we'll be covering each country bilateral relationships with India. All right. And how till now. So not just the past, we'll cover the history, geography of those nations, how the history and geography of India and the other nations have impacted their international relations. And at the end of the series, we will also see how the international organizations have affected India's bilateral or multilateral relationships. Now, this present session is about the launching session. It is about the determinants and institutions of foreign policy. That means what are these things which actually determine a nation's policy? So they just apply not only to India, but to the entire world. What are the various institutions that affect our foreign policy? So we'll discuss some of the institutions of India's foreign policy. We will also discuss some of the international institutions which actually determine the foreign policy of the entire world. So a couple of them I will be covering here. And so let's begin without wasting much time. So the contents for today's video will be a basic introduction to India's foreign policy, determinants of our foreign policy and institutions of our foreign policy. This part, continuity and change, or the 6 phases of our foreign policy, evolution of our foreign policy with our PMs, I will be covering in tomorrow's session. I will be covering all this entire IR series in sessions of 25 to 30 minutes so that it doesn't get heavy for my students. All right. But we will not miss out on anything. We will completely cover it. And this whole thing, if you check the UPSC syllabus, it is aligned with the syllabus of political science and international relations mains examination course. So this is the first bit of that when it comes to India and its relations with the world, or India and the world. And that is the part we'll be covering in our IR series. All right. Now, let's begin with today's session. Okay, so what is India? As we know, before we proceed with India's relationships, the determinants, it's important to know a couple of facts about India. so that we can align it with the determinants part of it, or what are the factors that determine any nation's foreign policy. First of all, our economy. We are the fifth largest economy by nominal GDP rates and third largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity. These are some of the figures you're already aware of, right? So we are pretty high here. We have left Japan also behind us. Military, we are the third largest by military expenditure, and that actually gives us a lot of negotiation power, though we are not still using it to our full capacity. We are the one of the largest armed forces, and we are definitely a nuclear power. So military wise also, we are actually gaining a lot of momentum. We are also now being considered a hard power. Hard power is the term used for military power, might. All right. Then socially, we are a well-known soft power. India is known for its art and culture. India is known for its Vasudev Kutumbakam policy, or taking everybody together with them, right? And India is a potential superpower. I discussed the concept of potential superpower when I discussed the India-China border dispute a couple of days ago on the YouTube channel itself. So you can go and watch it there. And the entire session was about what makes a country superpower, why is there a race to be a superpower, and we compared almost 5 to 10 countries of the world to compare them on the potential superpower status. With that, what are the founder international organizations? United Nations, which were the organizations of which India was part as a founding member. United Nations, we all know, after the Second World War. Asian Development Bank, which is one of the largest banks which provides loans to all the Asian nations. New Development BRICS Bank. So this is a very, very important initiative, because here it is easier for us to get loan. It's only for the BRICS countries. Non-aligned movement. Nehru is primarily known for this, and it has shaped our policy in a big, big way. In fact, even now, this policy never loses its relevance. Even now, when we are confused, we go back to the non-aligned policies. The G20, or the world's most developed economies and most promising economies, come together to discuss economic and political issues. Now, we have a very, very influential role in East Asia Summit. So, since the time of the UPA government, the East Asia or the Look East policy has been very, very prominent, because in our drive to actually balance our relationships with USA and Russia, we were actually losing out on our East Asian partners. So then we started to actually look back at them, because they are our immediate neighbors, and our culture, our art, our way of living is much more similar to our East Asian partners than to our Western partners. Though, not to mention that our Western partners have a lot more influence on our culture and lifestyle right now. The World Trade Organization, yes, we have a very, very influential role to play there because of our agricultural prowess. International Monetary Fund, we are actually gaining a lot more traction there. We will all be covering these international organizations and the role India plays there in little bit detail as the series progresses. IBSA Dialogue Forum, or the India Brazil South Africa Dialogue Forum. And obviously, India being a country which is on at par with the development in Brazil and South Africa, we really have a heft there. But the combined population of these three nations, the combined culture is huge. They have a huge impact on the world, and that's why it's a very, very powerful gathering. Now, what is a foreign policy? It is defined as a system of activities. So it's a system of activities evolved by the countries for adjusting their own activities. That means you don't adjust the somebody else's foreign policy. You adjust your own activities as per what is going on around the world or the international environment to actually influence them to adjust their own activities. You know, it's more like, say, we start to make our friendship stronger with the US and Russia in the hope that China and Pakistan will actually treat us on more friendlier terms, if not completely. So they won't be completely hostile. At least we'll have a negotiating point with them. And that was one of the reasons also we wanted to try to enter into NSG. That shows our might, that shows the faith the world shows in us. So every action we take on the international front is basically pointing towards letting the world know that we are here, we are there to contribute to the changing world, and we must be recognized, and we should be given that seat on the global diplomatic table. Foreign policy must throw light on the way state attempts to change itself and succeed in the changing behavior of other states. So your foreign policy topic will always be very, very dynamic. And that's why we have had 6 phases of foreign policy, depending on what we wanted to do and when was the time was right for what. All right. This definition has been given by Professor George Modelsky. He was an emeritus professor at the University of Washington. Now, why do we need a foreign policy? We need a foreign policy because it leads a state in fulfilling its national interest and acquiring rightful place among the comity of nations. How does it help the state in fulfilling its national interest? Have you seen the way US operates around the world? A very, very recent incident about which all of you are aware was one when they wanted hydroxychloroquine. The president could directly call our prime minister and tell him that we wanted that. India at first said no, that we are having an export ban on it, we require it in our country. But the might, the power, the way they can use and influence their power, both hard and soft, actually we had to open or even despite our export bans, we decided to help out America. And in the public, we actually had to say that we actually believe in the policy of Vasudev Kutumbakam and we want to help the entire world. But had it been any other nation, maybe we would have stuck our toes or we would have dug our toes a little bit deeper. So that is why America's foreign policy when Trump came in was America first. For him, the most important thing is that America should prosper, and that's what was his war cry when he went for the elections, and it actually won him in a big way. They wanted to protect the jobs, they wanted to preserve their culture. Even when America is a pot of melting cultures, they wanted to preserve some of its culture because the original inhabitants are actually reducing in numbers as compared to the other people that have come in here. So that is all one of those examples when you want to fulfill your national interest. The another example by us was when the UPA government during the time of Manmohan Singh, our Honorable Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, despite the left removing its support and telling or scaring the government that they will remove their support and the government will fall down or there'll be no confidence motion passed against the government, Manmohan Singh's government went ahead and went for the NSG waiver because they knew that it's not just the nuclear technology that we'll gain access to by the NSG waiver, but we will gain access into all the other missile technology control regimes and all the other technology regimes that have been holding India back for a long while now. They went ahead with it, took the support of the other political parties. So what did happen with that? Two important things happened. We not only got access to technology, we are now a part of 3 regimes, 3 export technology control regimes, the MTCR, the Wassenaar arrangement and the Australia group. All of these have happened recently. The only regime of which we are not part of is NSG, but the one-time waiver actually helped us get into that international standing. Now we not only have the technology, we also have the means to actually negotiate with China to enter into the NSG to say that we have very, very strong credentials. So that is the idea of foreign policy. Sometimes you need to put the foot down and take your nation forward to acquire its rightful place amongst the comity of nations. Now, with that, let's proceed to our first part of today's lecture. That is, what are the determinants of foreign policy? So, what have we learned so far? What is the foreign policy? Why is it required? Now we will learn the determinants of foreign policy. They are common to each and every nation. These determinants are common to each and every nation. Here, I have put them with respect to India so that whenever you write your answers, you can supplement it by this information. All right. The larger geography and natural resources. So the larger the geographical area and the natural resources a nation commands, the more influence it can actually command in the international sphere. In fact, India is the 7th largest country of the world and it commands its position accordingly. I wouldn't say it has always been doing that. In the ancient past, yes, and in the current past, again, yes. We are actually using our dominant position in the Indian subcontinent to our advantage. We have recently started doing that from the last 5 or 6 years when our GDP growth rate has improved. But how will your GDP growth rate improve? When you take use of the natural resources that you have been given, when you take use of the good human resources that you have been given, because on the basis of that only you will develop. So somebody might argue that even Africa and some other countries have very, very good natural resources, but they are not developing or not commanding that kind of position. they are not commanding that kind of position right now, but if you have heard the news right, it was said that 21st century will be Asian century, and post that actually now it's the time for the African or the African continent century, because they have very very good natural resources and all the nations are running there to get their projects done to actually occupy a piece of their economy there. So good natural resources always help you in good stead. In fact, the best example would be the Middle Eastern countries, the Central Asian countries where a lot of oil and natural gas is found. They actually command a lot of heft in the world economy because they can control the prices of oil, and basis which they earn a lot of money, which has helped them to grow economically and to grow then to grow technologically, because it's only when you can invest so much, when you have so much money, you can invest in technology and go ahead. Economy. Obviously, the more developed the nation, the more influential is its foreign policy, because you have the heft to actually say that we have certain things, we can make certain things on our own, and we can also provide to the nation. So whoever is a provider to the nation, provider to the rest of the world, always commands a little bit more of negotiating power. So that's what economy is about. So when in 1947 we started, our economy was completely depleted and destroyed by the colonial rule. But since then, we have actually bettered ourselves. And I just told you the numbers. We are the third largest economy by purchasing power rates. We are one of the fastest growing economies. If you minus the current coronavirus crisis when the entire world is going down, but we have been doing fairly well up till now. Leadership. Foreign policy of nations is largely affected by its top leadership. Very, very true. In fact, these people or these leaderships or these leaders are actually called yes, Rajendra, I'll just, okay, somebody has asked me. Yes, I will be making a detailed video on the Indian Foreign Services also. Why are the African countries suffering? Because yet now they don't have the technology. To utilize your natural resources, you need to have proper technology in place, and they're already fighting a lot of socio-economic problems there. Like AIDS is spread around the African continent in a very huge number. So that is there. All the other diseases actually take a toll on your human resources. So until your human resources are doing well, you actually cannot develop more technologically. I hope that has answered both the questions. Okay. Now, our foreign policy of the nation is largely affected by its top leadership. That's why we said that in the upcoming session, what we'll be doing is we'll be taking the phases of our the phases of our foreign policy by the means of how it has evolved with our prime ministers. Why with the prime ministers? Because we have a parliamentary form of government, and the prime minister holds all the power as the head of the cabinet to decide what the foreign policy should be. Even when we have an external affairs minister, the prime minister has a lot of influence in the foreign policy making, and especially in context of India, our foreign policy foundations come right from Jawaharlal Nehru's vision of India, and rightly so, because they were the primary participants of the freedom struggle. They were the primary participants of the constitution making activity, and finally he was one of our longest serving and most beloved prime ministers. And not to forget to mention one of the most learned, well-read persons who had a very very clear idea about the international foreign policy or international foreign policy determinants. If you read about his biography, if you read about his contributions to the Indian freedom struggle, you will know that he was a very very well-read person with connects and contacts all around the world. All right. In fact, that is what helped us get through the non-aligned movement in the first place. So, depending on the leadership, they are classified as hawks and doves. What do we mean by hawks and doves? So, in fact, if you must have heard this word a lot about our present National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Singh Doval. He's considered a hawk on the defense matters or the Indian foreign policy matters. So, a hawk stance means you are very, very you're a little bit aggressive when it comes to foreign policy. We will push our agendas very very aggressively, and if needed we will be ready to fight the other country or fight our rights out. All right. In fact, so the Secretary of State in the US, or the Foreign Secretary of State in the US, that time was Condoleezza Rice. I think during Obama's time it was Condoleezza Rice. So she was classified as a hawk because they were very particular about getting their agenda through, and they could use any means to do that. In fact, American foreign policy as a whole is actually usually known as a hawk policy because of the numerous wars and raids they have carried out across the entire world. They actually get their agenda satisfied no matter how. The doves usually believe in more peacekeeping. They will be the world's peacekeepers. Mostly France, India end up doing that. India is actually very famous for mediating in a lot of conflicts. We are very famous for mediating the conflict in the Korean Peninsula. So we are often asked to actually go and do that again. But right now we are kind of lacking that leadership and that influence which we had during Nehru's time. So we're not again able to influence that, but we are trying our way gradually into that. So that is what it means, that our foreign policy has evolved by the PMs of the nation, which I'll be taking up in the next session. Now, what is the other determinants? These were the external, these are the internal determinants, some of the internal determinants. Now, other one is evolution of political philosophy. Any nation's political philosophy determines the way it will behave on the world stage. For instance, for a lot of countries, if you look at the foreign policy of European Union together, you will see that they were formed because after the world wars ended, they actually understood that the whole Europe had been ravaged and the wars actually do not positively impact anyone. It's a loss for everyone. And since then, they have actually tried to maintain a lot of peace within themselves. They've opened their their boundaries entirely. So the way they have evolved politically has in a way defined the way they act with other their neighboring nations. In fact, the most impact of your evolution of political philosophy happens with your neighbors, right? For example, because of our freedom struggle, two things happened. The first thing that happened was we had a bloody partition with our neighbor, and even post that, another nation, the Western Pakistan, was converted into Bangladesh by a former Honorable Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Now, these things have greatly affected the way we deal with these two countries who were at once upon a time very much part of the Indian subcontinent. They were all brothers. But see the animosity that has risen because of the circumstances in the past and how we see our neighbors with a lot of distrust. Similarly, with China, before 1962, we were called Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, or India and China are brothers because they started off along with us. India got its independence in 1947, China got its independence in 1948. Now, when they started off together, but then slowly the paths diverged. By 1980s, their economy was going at a much higher rate than ours. And the 1962 war actually devastated the entire thing. So, as the political conditions across both the nations change, as the boundaries change, as the relationship at the boundaries change, it actually impacted our foreign policy towards our neighbors. For Pakistan, we have a different kind of foreign policy, that no talks without you curbing the terrorism on the border. For China, it is we are still trying to determine. We usually do the quiet diplomacy with China. We actually try to find out negotiating points with China, because with China you cannot compare on the hard power or the money power. Then what can you do? We try to influence it through soft power. We try to influence it through our IT power or the information technology power. We try to influence it by influencing other major powers in the world in our favor. So that is how we are doing it. And again, for example, our former PM Jawaharlal Nehru actually laid the foundation of the Panchsheel principles, or the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. We will be discussing them all when we will be discussing the prime ministers in detail. And then came I.K. Gujral. He gave the Gujral doctrine. When our present prime minister came into power, he gave a lot of importance to all the SAARC nations. His first visit was he actually, during when his oath taking ceremony in 2014, he called all the SAARC nations to his oath taking ceremony. For the first place where he went to after his all oath taking ceremony, he went to all the Southeast Asian nations. He said that they're very important, they are brethren. And that's when we had this program called Saga, Security and Growth for All, for the Indian Ocean region, and we are still giving a lot of priority to the Indian Ocean region rim. In fact, we recently started the INS Sagar Dhwani, mission where we'll be interacting with all the Indian Ocean rim states for more research and development. Now, constitution. Each nation's constitution actually defines its political philosophy, and most of the times, all the governments are actually the most important determinant of the foreign policy is the way the constitution has been formulated. We are a secular nation, and that's why any nation which is extremely religious about its policies, we actually have a little bit difficulty adjusting to the way they conduct their foreign policies. We are a nation which believes in giving equal rights to men and women. There are some other nations which actually don't do that. So for our citizens, when they go there, it becomes a little difficult. We will allow anybody. It's for people to come and work in India. It's relatively easier. We've usually practiced open borders since ancient times, and we kind of still do it. So we have given that privilege to both Nepal and Bhutan. People can come in and work inside here. In fact, Nepal and India have a very unique relationship when we talk about open borders. All right. Now, art and culture, food, language, art, music, etc. actually binds people. In fact, it is used as one of the most important soft powers when we are trying to deal with very hostile nations. It is very common in the times of India and Pakistan. Whenever we discuss that, when we talk about cricket is one of the most binding factors between India and Pakistan, and it's also the most conflicting ones. And whenever we talk about India and Pakistan, we say that they were brothers. They had more in common than the differences. Our way of life is same. For an average Indian, for an average Pakistani citizen, the life is same. The problems are same. The socio-economic development problems still remain the same. So our Indian foreign policy tries to align with that of its neighbors to a lot of extent, because neighbors are your most important part of geography. In fact, there was a very famous question in the mains examination. History can change, but geography cannot. You can still change the history, you can rewrite the books, but you cannot change the geography. It's the physical part of it. And that's why you have to be aware of it. Now, history. So, we were a region rich in natural resources and were ruled by various princely states and later colonized by the British. Now, this had a very important role to play in our foreign policy. Why? Because during this time when we were struggling to gain independence, we understood a lot more about the Western powers. That's when I said that Jawaharlal Nehru had a very early exposure to all these things, the way the Western power functioned. He was actually greatly influenced by the Soviet Russia, how they actually performed their socio-economic development, which also formed the crux of our constitution and the 1930 declaration of Swaraj India, or Swaraj. And these factors have actually seeped deep into the strata of foreign policy. We admit it or not, your history will always influence your present directions, your present decisions, because we know certain things from the history that this nation is going to behave in this particular way. This thing hasn't worked particularly well in the history, so we should be a little bit cautious before taking those steps. And that's how history becomes an important internal determinant. Now, what are the external determinants? Now, this is very important. Please pay a lot of attention here. So, these are all a part of general global environment. I have distributed the general global environment into a couple of pointers. All right. This is from a reputed international article that I have taken these factors. So, I will just go with them one by one. First is the power structure. So I do not know how many of you, apart from those who have political science and IR as a proper subject, there was a Treaty of Westphalia signed in 1648. It actually still largely governs the structure of power amongst the nations. It divides the countries into big, middle and small powers. This Westphalia Treaty, Westphalia is a place in Germany. All right. Now, it decides the interaction that takes place between these states based on their power or their determination of power at the international stage. All right, because it says that the more powerful or the bigger the more powerful the state is, the way it interacts with other states is actually changes. The bigger powers have usually a more aggressive stance on everything. The middle powers like India They will always be the balancers in the international relations, and the smaller powers will either try to congregate together like the African Union or the island nations, or they will try to align with the bigger powers. So that was, how do we understand it? So that's in the pre-Cold War era, the smaller powers aligned with either of the two bigger powers, that is Russia and the USA. After the middle power tried to balance that bipolar world and said no, there'll be a non-aligned movement, and these smaller powers actually aligned with the middle powers so that they could maintain the multilateral flavor of the world. So this is how the entire power structure works. In fact, a lot of selected events in the history of the world have had a lot of impact on the power structure of the world. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, the rise of the communist power in China in 1949, the rise of de Gaulle to power in France and Hitler in Germany. In fact, the power structure was so much influenced by these two developments, especially the Hitler in Germany and the other dictatorships in Italy and other places. So much so that we had to fight a war to actually bring back peace into action. Sorry, please apologize for this papa. It's decolonization and the emergence of new states in Asia and Africa. This was a very, very big event. A lot of nations in Asia and Africa actually gained their independence at the same time around India, and these nations actually decided to help each other, and that is one of the reasons India and these African nations are still very close to each other, because they've developed together, and India has always been like a brother to them who has tried to help them in their difficult times, because we understood how hard it was to come out of our freedom struggle and develop into a running and well oiled economy. So we are trying to help all our African friends. In fact, it was said that during this corona crisis, we really helped our African nations well, and it is actually the time to go and show them our presence there, use our soft power, use our medical power there, so that India and Africa can actually come together a lot, so that we can be a part of their socio-economic development. The Cold War of 1980s, I already mentioned about that, and the disintegration of USSR, because it completely, in one instance, changed the entire power structure of the world. From a bipolar world, it became a unipolar world, and it has been like that since. In fact, to some people, the current US and China trade wars, the skirmishes are actually an indication that US has become very insecure of its position relative to China. Some say it's because some say it will still take a lot of time for China to actually become a raging superpower like the US, because there's a huge difference in the economy. USA is a $20 trillion economy. The defense expenditure is something which is beyond the budget of many economies around the country, including China. China is still a $13 trillion economy. The hard power and the soft power of USA is world encompassed. The American style has impacted not only their continent, but the entire continent of the this Eurasian continent and the Indian subcontinent. Especially the American style has influenced India in a big, big way, which has almost 1/7 and or more than 1/7 of the world's population. So it's still very hard to shrug off. The international organizations, as I told you, I will be taking the Westphalia Treaty in our later sessions. All right, so I will take that in detail. Today we are just doing a launching session, introductory session. Morning, everybody, so that nobody, it's not heavy for everybody. We'll cover all of these things in detail. I'm just giving you an overview of the foreign policy today. Okay. Now, there are currently almost 68,000 international organizations, both active and inactive, right? That they include the associations that are formed to determine foreign policies. So yesterday I was actually Googling how many foreign policy institutes we have, and trust me, there are quite many. One of the famous being the Foreign Policy Research Institute. It's based out of the USA. Some of its articles are freely available. Most of them you have to have a paid subscription for that, but beautifully written articles. They have a perspective of everything, even the smallest issues going on around the world. All right. And these international organizations, they are large number of international, regional organizations, arrangements, agreements, and trading blocks. The NATO, the EU, the Indian Ocean Rim that I talked about, the NAFTA is there. All right, the SAFTA is there. South Asian Free Trade Agreement, of which India is a part of. All right. the regional trade, comprehensive trade agreement that we have, the IMF, World Bank, WHO, IPCC. I will discuss about these organizations in a little bit detail in the next coming slides. United Nations and its affiliates actually play a very, very important role in determining the foreign policy, because United Nations is actually one intergovernmental body which discusses or encompasses every genre related to human civilization. So it has a huge, huge impact on foreign policy. In fact, whenever some bilateral skirmish happens or multilateral skirmish happens, it directly goes to UN. So if some prime minister, some president is making a speech in the UN about their issues, then it is considered to be very, very important. So even when you are preparing, keep an eye on what is being spoken to in the United Nations. These are serious issues. These are then they become world issues, and they're very, very important for anybody who's trying to get into the Indian Foreign Services or for any other civil servant also, because our foreign policy will actually, in the coming times, as I am seeing it, will start impacting our domestic policy in a big, big manner. All right. Now, to a large extent, serve as modifiers of state behavior as an independent actor. Now, international law. So, as per Cali, it has been a system of rules created deliberately. We have created those international laws deliberately and explicitly by states, where states have expressly willed to be bound by the rules. For example, the UN Convention on Child Labor, we are signatories to that. So why did we sign to it? We signed it out of our own voluntary this thing, our voluntary compulsion. We were not compelled to sign it. Why? Because we thought it would be good to have such kind of rules, because child labor in any form is actually ruining our economy, it is ruining our bright future. Or when it comes to certain international peace treaties, we are a part of that. All right. For example, the UN Convention Laws of the Sea. Why is it very important? Otherwise, people will go around ravaging the entire oceans, and we cannot lose such a huge natural resource. And furthermore, we do not know what will be the impacts of everybody going and ravaging the natural resources. And there's an Antarctica treaty also. You are not supposed to actually habit Antarctica or use it for resource extraction purposes. So these all treaties are sometimes there to prevent, to maintain a world order, and states deliberately sign into them. Now, that is to maintain international order so that states can pursue national interests, as I've already mentioned. Alliances. So, in fact, there is both a pro and con to the alliances. Whenever alliances are formed, it's actually a good thing, because they can alliances coming together of nations with common interests. So whenever that happens, they can not only increase trade within themselves, they can act as a unified trade bloc and trade with the rest of the world. For example, the Gulf Cooperation Council, or oil exporting countries of the world, the OPEC, right? Now, this is one positive point where they happens, because they have now a huge bargaining power compared to the rest of the world, because a lot of people have come together. Or it might have an adverse effect on the world, because these kind of secret alliances actually led to our world wars. All right, especially the First World War was because of these alliances that were being secretly formed by Bismarck. Now, that's why, and some of the alliances, the Warsaw Pact, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Warsaw was with the USSR. It was related to the USSR. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization related to the US. They were still the major alliances. Now they have lost some of their heft, because the international order does not actually now more actually requires their interference. But with the NATO still remains powerful, as we saw in the Syrian war, the attack on Iraq. All right. And the Western powers actually went all the way into Afghanistan to fight terrorism. So the NATO has been still powerful, because America still retains its superpower status. Good morning, everybody. All right. I hope everybody is with me and you're able to follow what we are doing here. Everybody with me still? Okay. Now, military strategies. So your military strategies actually determine, or the other nation's military strategy actually determines the kind of foreign policy you're going to have towards them. A very recent case being China's military strategy. They started building up their infrastructure. They built the Xinjiang Tibet Highway. We started building the Darbuk Shio Daulat Beg Oldie Road, so DSDBO road. In response to the Xinjiang uh, Tibet Highway, we started building the DSDBO road. So their stance was aggressive, our stance was here more protective. But to show them that we will not back down, we will have our own infrastructure in place just so that you remain cautious, that you don't intervene in our boundary. And despite that, when they intervene, our prime minister said that we will give them a fitting reply. In fact, that is something what we did in the case of Pakistan also. We did that Uri attack right after the Uri strike, the Uri surgical strikes, right after the Pulwama attack. All right. Now, so, the first modern arm race actually took place when France and Russia challenged the naval superiority of Britain in the late 19th century. Do you guys remember, as students of UPSC, you must be aware of the naval race. At that point of time, whoever was strong in the navy would actually rule the rest of the world, and there was a major Britain and France struggle going on in India. That's where the France used to support a couple of southern states, the Britain used to support a couple of states, and the Anglo-French wars used to go on simultaneously. But finally, the British actually outlived the France, and the France decided to go to some other places. With that, I'm actually reminded of a very interesting facts in the history. Have you guys seen the map of African continent? Have you guys seen that African continent map? Africa has most of its nations actually divided into squares or triangles only, or very very unique, geometric entities. You can clearly identify. Yes. Now, you know why it is this? Because the colonial powers of that time actually they used to sit with the map in one room, and then they used to decide the area of the land in Africa that they will occupy. So they used to directly draw a line like this. Now, this is the area I will rule. The other country used to say, this is the area that I will rule. Another country used to say, they used to draw a line here and say, this is the country that I will rule. And that is how they actually divided the entire African map. And that's why you see a lot of history in Africa from both the British, the France, and the Portuguese, Dutch, everybody, those ruling powers of those days, you actually see all the remnants of the history there. The Cold War led to a very ferocious arms race in the world. Definitely, you had two superpowers fighting for hegemony in the world. Definitely, there had to be an arms race. And right now, also, we are actually in an arms race with China and Pakistan. Pakistan is an arms race. Yes, scale say. Yes, Amit, scale say. Pakistan is an arms race with us, and we are in an arms race with China. We are in an arms race, I think, with the entire world also, and not just arms race. In fact, we should add here, along with the military strategies, the space race also is now going on there. It is one of the races of superpowers. I urge all of you to actually go and watch the India-China border dispute videos that I put on the YouTube. I will also put a link inside the comment section of this video. Why? Because I have in detail discussed what makes a country a superpower and what are the various parameters on which a superpower status is governed, and which countries are actually potential superpowers or which countries cannot be the superpowers. So it's a very very detailed lecture. Please go and have a look at it. You will better be able to understand the foreign policy, external determinants of the foreign policy. What are the last external policy? That is the regional environment. Now, we say that in your region you should be the lion. Why? Because then you will have a little bit more control over your neighbors, a little bit more say in their foreign policy, which will help you collectively impact not just their foreign policy but as a bloc to impact the world's foreign policy against you. In fact, India occupying a very very primary position by the means of its geography in the South Asian continent, like our entire peninsula. We are the largest peninsula in the world. Here is the Middle East. Here are some of the island countries. Here is Sri Lanka. Then we have Bangladesh, Myanmar, all following in China up here. We try to actually influence all our island nations. Sri Lanka, Nepal here. All right. So by this, what do we actually intend to do? Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Sri Lanka. we have a considerable say in their foreign policy. How? We actually give them a lot of aid. Their culture and art is actually a lot more similar to us. In fact, with both Nepal and Sri Lanka, a lot of Indians are already living there. A lot of Nepalis are living in our country. Nepal and India have close ties over the religion. Almost 90 to 100% of the people living in Nepal are Hindus, and Hinduism is a majority religion in India. Though I'm not here to talk about religion per se, but I'm talking about the binding factors between people. So the binding factors between people actually make you have a larger say in the foreign policy, as I just discussed, that art and culture has a very, very strong impact on that. Bangladesh, we have friendly relations because we actually help Bangladesh gain independence. Bhutan, of course, we provide a lot of aid. We import a lot of power from them. We give them a lot of aid to develop their own nation. Maldives, yes, a lot of people working there are Indians already. Indians are there as doctors, as hosts, and as tourist people. Sri Lanka, so Tamil and Sri Lankans are very, very common. They are the brethren of Tamil Nadu people living in India, and that's why a lot of issues that happen there actually have a lot of impact on the state of Tamil Nadu here, and then finally on Indian polity, right? Now, this is the important chunk of information. As I told you, we'll be discussing some of the international institutions in brief, and we'll be discussing that they are influencing the foreign policy and how, in which areas. So the first, of course, is the United Nations group of agencies. The members of United Nations are 195, including 2 observer states. This is the present status. All right. Now, its headquarters are in New York, USA. Its foundation year is right after the Second World War, 1945, so it's easy to remember. It is one of those few organizations whose headquarters is in New York, USA. Otherwise, it is either in Washington, D.C., USA, or if you don't find anything else, whenever you are supposed to mark an option regarding them, the first option would be Geneva, Switzerland. They have almost most of the headquarters in the world. What is the primary objective of the United Nations? Why have I put it first? Because it has a very, very comprehensive objective to maintain international peace, security, and develop friendly relations amongst the nations. It was created out of the ravages of a war. When League of Nations failed after the First World War, it was created after the ravages of the World War. So definitely, one of its major important goals is to maintain international peace. And why still it commands the major impact on foreign policy? Because international peace is the dream of every nation around the world, because without that peace no nation can prosper. A disturbance in any part of the world actually, because of globalization and because of so much connectivity, disturbs the entire world's trade and economy, and it can make paupers out of any world economy, which is actually happening now. In fact, there is a very common saying that if America sneezes, the entire world catches cold. Right now, if somebody sneezes in China, the rest of the world has gone down with that economy. All right. Okay. Now, the second organization is World Bank. It is a bank to the world, very rightly said. It provides loans and grants to government of poorer countries for the purpose of pursuing capital projects. It hands-hold a lot of projects in India already. Okay, and right now its motto is to reduce poverty in the world. It has a member nations of 189 countries in the International Board of Reconstruction and Development. It has primarily two main organizations within it: International Board of Reconstruction and Development and International Development Association. This has 173 countries and this has 189 countries. Its headquarters are in Washington, D.C., USA, and it just came a year before the World War ending. It's a part of the Bretton Woods system. All right. Bretton Woods system. In fact, this and the IMF are known as Bretton Woods sisters. Okay, they were found there. The World Trade Organization, very, very important. 164 countries, Geneva, Switzerland, found in 1995. All right. Now, here, after the General Trade and Agreement Treaty, okay, concerned with the regulation of international trade, and trade will definitely always have a lot of influence on your foreign policy. You know, we often see a lot of nations warring with each other. In fact, even India took USA to the even USA and even India took USA to the World Trade Organization. Even USA took China to the World Trade Organization. So that trade, they try to actually negotiate in very, very peaceful terms, because they know if the trade is impacted, their entire economy will be impacted. And hence, if the nation is impacted, you really can't do much politically or in your foreign policy terms. So that's why international trade becomes very, very important. WHO. WHO has this organization called World Health Assembly. It's an assembly of all the nations together. Then they have an executive, council there, of which India is the current chairman right now for 3 years. It recently became the chairman, and it has 194 countries, or the entire nations of the world, participating. Again, its headquarters are in Geneva, Switzerland, and it was formed in 1948. It is a specialized agency of the United Nations. Okay, do not forget that. The attainment by all peoples of the highest possible levels of health is its motto. And hence, it actually impacts our foreign policy in a big, big manner. Now, IMF, International Monetary Fund, it has 189 members. Its headquarters are in Washington, D.C., USA. The foundation year is 1944, as I called you. It is a Bretton Woods system, Bretton Woods sisters, the IMF and the World Bank, both the international organizations. The difference between these organizations is that IMF is primarily the policy making body. It brings all the nations together, discusses their problems, try to help them in policy making, in better policy making regarding their trade and monetary policies or fiscal policies. World Bank, on the other hand, actually gives you out the money. So IMF actually relies on the World Banks for its resources, to give out resources to the nations. IMF's major agenda is to foster global monetary cooperation. Okay, in fact, the Financial Action Task Force is actually an initiative of the IMF only. The Financial Action Task Force actually curbs funding to the terrorist organizations, and that's why this organization is very, very important. The other agenda of IMF is for financial stability, facilitating international trade, promoting high employment and sustainable economic growth. All right, along with reducing poverty, for which it depends on the World Bank for its resources. IPCC, as I told you, I will be talking about IPCC. It is open to all the members of WMO. What is WMO? World Meteorological Organization. Obviously, IPCC is Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. It is again a specialized agency of the UN. Okay, World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations. So it's open to all those members. Again, the headquarters are in Geneva, Switzerland. It was came into formulation. It is a panel. It is not an international organization. It is a panel of members. It came into being in 1988. The main agenda of IPCC is to provide the world with objective scientific information which is relevant to their understanding of human induced climate change and the risk that it causes to the natural, political and economic well-being of the nations, and to formulate possible actions regarding that. And that is why whenever the agenda of climate change comes into being, IPCC is inadvertently mentioned, it is necessarily mentioned. And that's why it is very important in formulating policies, because right now the climate change agenda is on top of the world. In fact, some of the people, some of the think tanks also say, the intelligentsia also says that the current coronavirus is a result of unending human interference into the nature. So nature has its own cleansing mechanism, and hence the coronavirus, of which we have no treatment, and the entire world had to lock down just to let the nature rejuvenate itself. And that's why this nation will become very, very important. You will not need to start from scratch, because I am actually already starting from scratch. So we will cover the international relations with respect to the UPSC, the prelims and the mains examination. I will not be covering here the optional course. I will be covering here the international relations part for the prelims and for the mains, but keeping in view the mains examination. All right? Okay. What are the various institutions impacting foreign policy in India? Okay, the Ministry of External Affairs, yes, of course, it's the ministry dedicated to external affairs. National Security Council, Prime Minister's office, that's why I said the PMs will always be very, very influential in this. Parliament, definitely, we are a democracy. So every foreign policy is actually discussed there. In fact, recently there was a hue and cry why the diplomacy with China on the border is not being discussed with the parliament when the cabinet is actually accountable to the parliament as per the constitution and the parliamentary committees. So we will discuss all these pointers in a greater bit detail going forward. Now, the Ministry of External Affairs is supposed to provide intelligent, accurate answers to the questions of foreign policy. What to act, how to act, when to act, which nations to interact with, what to tell them, what agreements to sign with them, what should be our next negotiation point, how to draft those agreements. All right. Now, then who is the head of the Ministry of External Affairs? It's a minister. He's a part of the cabinet of the Prime Minister. I would like to mention here some points about the parliament. So, starting from Nehru till almost Indira Gandhi and further Rajiv Gandhi also, all these peoples actually believed, since they had a lot of international exposure, they actually had a small coterie of people actually advising them on foreign policy. We did not have a dedicated Minister of External Affairs, so to be called. Usually the prime ministers decided themselves with the help of some other experts on what the foreign policy should be, especially during the times of Nehru, and then he was a very, very learned man. But later on, it came to our realization that as India is expanding and as the world is expanding, it becomes very imperative that we have a dedicated ministry and a dedicated set of experts helping us just with the foreign policy. However, when the Modi government started off, they actually took all the sheen of the Ministry of External Affairs. So for all the foreign tours and everything, our Prime Minister only used to go. Our Ministry of External Affairs used to look after the other affairs, like actually evacuating people in times of crisis. That's what Sushma Swaraj is known for, the late Sushma Swaraj is known for. And she did some fabulous, fabulous work, no doubt about that. But our Prime Minister, not to mention here, our Prime Minister Modi actually defined or gave more importance or direction to our foreign policy going now. He actually paid a lot of importance on our neighbors, and which is also what we are following right now. And I'll tell you one more thing here. Why do we are focusing so much on the neighbors? Because as I told you, we cannot change the geography, and if we do not have peace at the borders, it actually hampers our development. Now, this minister of External Affairs is actually supported by the Indian Foreign Office service officials. Okay, they are selected through the competitive exams conducted by the Union Public Service Commission, or the UPSC. In fact, it is already there in the form. If you clear your prelims, when you appear for the mains, you get a DAF to be filled, detailed application form, in which you can actually give the choices of your services. Now, this person, the foreign secretary, is the main person who will actually decide what should be going on in our foreign policy. Foreign secretary is actually, in fact, right now, as of today, our ex-foreign secretary S. J. Shankar is actually right now the foreign minister. He is now assisted by a foreign secretary. Now, this foreign secretary is assisted by two other foreign secretaries, one for foreign secretary East, one for foreign secretary West. These he is also assisted additionally by additional secretaries, 3 additional secretaries. So that is the entire structure, at least when it concerns to the first 3 levels. Then the Ministry of External Affairs is actually divided into 24 divisions. Okay. Now, these 24 divisions, they actually carry out the work at different levels of geographies. Why 24 divisions? You can't have only one division and take care of the entire geography of the world. So these 24 divisions are actually divided into territorial divisions, and they are each headed by a joint secretary level person. Now, there are 12 territorial divisions, okay, dealing with a group of countries belonging to limited region like Canada in America, Latin America, Caribbean countries, Gulf, East Asia. So these are the names of the divisions. The other 11 divisions functions are maintaining the protocol, international protocol, external publicity, historical policy planning, and the UN, taking care of the UN. And there is finally one administrative division which does a kind of the housekeeping work for the Ministry of External Affairs also. You also need your internal administration part also, right? That's why that one division is there for this. What is the National Security Council? This is a National Security Council meeting going on in progress. when our late Sushma Swaraj was still alive and when Arun Jaitley was still alive. Now, National Security Council, we earlier had no National Security Council concept. As I told you, our prime ministers believed that they can do the foreign policy thing on their own. But then later, when the skirmishes on the borders increased, we needed to have a National Security Council to think about foreign policy in terms of our defense policy. So this is tasked with, this body is an executive body. Remember this, it's an executive body. It's not a legislative body, not a statutory body, but an executive body that is made by the executive orders of the government. The regions are not defined. They are for the entire eastern world and the western world. That's how it is. All right. Okay. Now, they are tasked with advising the Prime Minister's office on matters of national security and strategic interest. It was established during the times of Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji in 1998 when the Kargil war was in the making, and Brajesh Mishra was the first national security advisor. It has a three-tier structure. I give you this for homework to go and study the three-tier structure of the National Security Council. It will give you a lot of insight on how the policy making actually happens inside the National Security Council. The first is the Strategic Policy Group. The second is the National Security Advisory Board, and the third is a Secretariat from the Joint Intelligence Committee, because these two actually require a Secretariat to carry out their administrative work. The Prime Minister's Office, or the PMO, it consists of immediate staff of Prime Minister of India. All right. The PMO is as powerful as the Prime Minister, because if the Prime Minister gives a lot of importance to PMO, it becomes powerful. Otherwise, it actually remains a little bit latent. That's how it works. The PMO is headed by Principal Secretary right now, currently Pramod Kumar Mishra. All the staff actually report to the Prime Minister. They help the Prime Minister in various functionalities and to also help him handle the various ministries that he is head of, or that he's handling, the charges that he's handling. It was originally called Prime Minister's Secretariat until 1977 when Indira Gandhi was there. Then it was renamed during the Morarji Desai ministry as Prime Minister's Office. Now, what about the parliamentary committees? So there is a parliamentary committee called the Committee on External Affairs. Have you guys heard about departmentally related standing committees of the Lok Sabha? They are very, very important, the committees of the Lok Sabha. So each departmentally related standing committee of the Lok Sabha actually consists of 31 members. All right, it is a given rule. This is how they are formulated. 21 are from Lok Sabha out of these members and 10 are from Rajya Sabha. The representation of different parties or groups in these committees is in proportion to their strength in both houses of the parliament, so that there is an equal representation to each party. The chairman is appointed by the speaker, that is Speaker of the Lok Sabha, appoints the chairman for this committee from the members of the committee themselves. So no other person becomes the chairman, only the members, one of the members of the committee becomes the chairman. The ministers are not eligible to be nominated as either member or the chairman of the standing committees, so to avoid conflict of interest. All right. The term of office of each standing committee is 1 year from the date of its constitution. Now, why do we have these departmentally related standing committees? Their primary job is to actually audit that particular ministry for which they are formed. This departmentally related stated committee will actually go through the entire work in 1 year of the Ministry of External Affairs, their annual reports, audit what they have done for government, then pinpoint it to the parliament and say that this is where the government went wrong, government should be answerable for certain things, this we could have done better. It also looks into the budgeting of each of these ministries and how they could have been utilized better. All right, so this is the work of the departmentally related standing committees. I urge you to go and look them better. It's a part of public administration and you should be aware of these departmentally related standing committees because they are a part of polity. It will definitely be there in the Lakshmikant. Go and visit it. That's your homework. So 2 homeworks for today. Look at the National Security Council and look at the departmentally related standing committees. Now, our foreign policy in nutshell, I will not cover it here as of now. It is still there, but I will not cover it here today. I will go with the foreign policy in nutshell once I have covered how the foreign policy has evolved with our prime ministers, or what are the 6 phases of our foreign policy. So preferably we should meet tomorrow mostly. If there is a change in the schedule, It will be there on my Telegram group link for current affairs, which is here. You can interact with me directly here. I post all my upcoming videos and sessions here. Or no, it is not taking the decisions of all the external ministries. Go and study this in detail. That's why I asked you, it's your homework. Go and study this in detail. All right. This is the channel link for Telegram. So post all your upcoming videos here. I post all my upcoming videos here, so you can become a member of either the channel or the group. So whenever the next session of this is coming, mostly tomorrow or day after tomorrow, I will be posting it here on these channels so that you can stay well informed and you do not miss out on the India IR series. Finally, if you liked, I suppose that you liked the video because I did a lot of hard work into bringing all this very wonderful content to you. So please subscribe to our channel. Share my videos so that more of your civil services aspirants can benefit from these videos. So please share these videos and please subscribe to our channel. Let's crack UPSC CSE in English. Also hit the bell icon for more notifications from videos from me and from others on our channel who produce some wonderful content. Also for an Unacademy subscription, which you must take because I'm already taking science and technology courses there. And the entire length of science and technology from May 19 to May 2020. I'm still teaching a couple of sessions there. So I've covered this entire range for science and technology. They're split up covering the entire mains and prelims course for science and technology so that you can completely leave science and technology to my lectures. It's a 13 session series of 1.5 hours each, where you can directly interact with me. I explain you each concept in a lot of detail and get an instant 10% discount by using my code Siddhi Bangard on Unacademy Plus or SBUS, so that your cost on 6-month, 12-month or 24-month subscription comes down significantly. With that, I will close for today. Thank you and have a good day.